Welcome to the Artist Academy podcast, a place where we focus on the business side of art to help you attract more customers, increase profits, and ultimately live a life of creativity and financial freedom. I'm your host, Andrea Earhart, and this week's episode features Florida-based visual artist Cody Meacham of Radley Relics. Cody crafts nostalgic miniatures inspired by beloved theme park attractions and horror films. Each piece is meticulously designed, reflecting his passion for capturing the essence of iconic haunted experiences. This is perfect for as we're coming up on Halloween, right? When Cody has worked on projects for Universal Studios, not to name drop there, and has nestled lately into his own business of collaborating with collectors to create custom pieces. He leans into the fact that his work is extremely niche, with creating these very small haunted dioramas, and it has a very unique, nailed down audience too. And Cody interacts with his collectors to gain insight from them as to what they might be looking for in his work. Having that one-on-one communication with people who have already bought into his work helps him customize each piece to the liking of his fan base. Instead of starting completely from scratch every time and just making things up and hoping it goes well, not knowing how something is going to be perceived, by getting upfront feedback from collectors, he already knows that each creation will be a hit. It's genius. It's simple. Why don't we all do this? I don't know. Why don't I just ask people what they want to see before I create it? And I try to think of some brand new idea on my own, asking my audience. Who'd have thought? And not only that, but asking an audience of people who have already bought into my work. I am taking this strategy into when I create canvases next, for sure. But there's a fine line between doing what you love and taking outside advice to dictate what you do, right? And Cody is walking that line brilliantly. So let me know what you think about this week's episode with Cody Meacham of Radley Relics. All right, I'm here with Cody Meacham of Radley Relics, and I know nothing about what you do, which just makes me really excited to dive into all the things, especially with Halloween season coming up and all the things. So tell me, how did you get to where you are, which is doing really cool? How would you even describe it?
Well, that's where kind of my name came from. Radley Relics is because I want my pieces to feel sort of like nostalgic references and relics of theme park industry stuff, and as well as horror movie things that people love. So that's where the name kind of came from, other than a haunted attraction I used to do. Now, the last one was 2014, so it's been a while, but that was called the Radley Haunted House, which is why I carried over Radley to my business name. And so that's kind of where the story starts. Is I was doing a haunted house outside of my parents' house for about 10 years. And I started on my own until it got a little bit more popular. I met some friends through that, which started helping me out with costuming and building the house and stuff. And one day, well, actually a couple of years in a row, I was messaging the creators, or one of the creators of Halloween Horror Nights, Mike Aiello. He works for Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Orlando. And just kind of on a whim, I was like, oh, let's see what he says or if he's interested. And eventually he was like, yeah, me and a couple friends want to come and check out your haunted house. They were coming from Orlando. I was in St. Pete, so that's like a two-hour drive. They did come down in 2013, and it wasn't just some of his friends. It was like the whole creative crew of Halloween Horror Nights, which almost sent me into a heart attack. But they came and they loved it, and they kind of talked to me afterwards about, what I wanted to do. And that sort of initiated the idea of moving to Orlando and working for them at Halloween Horror Nights. So I was able to get a job with art and design in the decor team, who would decorate all the haunted houses, which, if you don't know, they do usually 10 elaborate new haunted houses every year, which are fully themed and decked out to look like movie sets. They're very high quality. And then that sort of eventually led into me getting into the scenic industry, which, as a scenic painter, because we were working alongside the people who would bring the haunted houses to life from the illustrations that they were given by design at Universal, a third-party vendor would usually be the ones to build out the house and then add texture and paint. And I thought that was super interesting. I was like, wow, I've always loved creating environments, which I was helping to do with decor. But I thought maybe I should dabble in that. And so I met a friend in that department from a third-party vendor, and she sort of became my scenic paint mom and a good friend. And from there, I moved into the scenic world. So that's where the exciting adventure really begins, because that's where I kind of found what felt like I was meant to do at the time, especially because growing up, I was always a huge theme park nerd. I loved theme park attractions, and I loved the way they made, especially Disney, would make things feel authentic and realistic as an environment goes. So from there, I did Halloween Horror Nights for a few years, as well as Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure, which is currently the latest Harry Potter attraction at Universal. I've just had some amazing connections in Orlando that have got me some pretty cool jobs. And so that's kind of the journey until 2020. I was working at Halloween Horror Nights that year when the pandemic hit. And luckily, we were able to work through the pandemic to finish the haunted houses, because I guess at that time, which was like, March, they assumed, oh, the pandemic's not going to be a big deal when it comes to September when we open. So we'll just finish the haunted houses. So I worked through July until we found out the Horror Nights was canceled. And then I was kind of forced to go home and figure out, what am I going to do to, as an artist, as a gig-based artist, what am I going to do to make money? And I had already started kind of dabbling in miniatures. I've always loved miniatures growing up. I was super into model trains. And so I just started going from there and building theme park related stuff, because I was already in Orlando. My social media at the time was very Orlando centric and theme park centric. And so that was kind of my audience that I was going towards, and creating Halloween Horror Nights things or theme park things and building it up from there. And that's kind of landed me where I am now. That was a long-winded opening statement.
No, that's perfect. It tells your story about working for Universal Studios. No big deal. I remember when I first started, especially, I was like, I just want to paint for Disney. I'm such a huge Disney fan. And I'm actually listening to one of the villain series that some other artist wrote about Disney. Like, I'm listening.
I saw you posting that.
The Audible version of that. Anyway, huge Disney fan. So I'm just nerding out that you worked for them and you were doing all of that. Okay. So I'm thinking about my experiences. So I worked with Bass Pro Shops, which is not the same thing, but it's very similar. And you work for a big company, right? And there's a bunch of stuff that goes along with that. Like, they didn't like me to share photos and whatnot. Did they allow you to share photos?
Describe allow. Not really, no. But once, for example, Halloween Horror Nights, once the event was open, I could sort of post photos that they posted and be like, oh, I was a part of this.
I gotcha.
And then when it was a couple years removed, I felt more comfortable posting like, oh yeah, I helped build this thing specifically. So
very cool. How do you like being in that more of like corporate environment versus working for yourself? What's the differences?
It's a great question. I love working for myself, although I am a workaholic, so I work all the time. But yeah, I definitely prefer doing my own artwork, because as much fun as it was to recreate somebody's two-dimensional illustration and bring it into reality, into three-dimensionals, that was super fun, but it was always somebody else's artwork that I was sort of translating, and there's almost no credit for that, because even though we were doing the hard work, not the office work, we weren't really credited for that. So I relish in the idea of doing my own work now and being able to share it whenever I want in any stage of the process. There was lots of negatives, but there's lots of positives as well. Working for Disney was really cool. Eventually working for them, and I got to work on the Jungle Cruise refurbishment for both Disney World and Disneyland. That was my first big Disney job, I think. And because it was such a small thing, it was only like 4 or 5 of us. So it was cool to say like, oh, we, had a large hand in helping paint the new props, including the sinking boat and some of the signs, with a really cool team of my friends. And that was right after the pandemic, or not after the pandemic, but shortly after. So like I said, it was a small group and just us in a warehouse. So that was really cool.
Okay, so I'm trying to envision whenever you worked for them, and then we'll get to what you make now too. But what was the process like? So they would send you drawings and say, "We need this." Would it be exact measurements that they would send you, and you would have to create? And were you making it in a warehouse with 20 other people working on the same thing, or paint me a picture?
That's a great question too. It all depends. Halloween Horror Nights was my favorite kind of job to do in the industry because it was so fast paced. We're supposed to have only like 7 to 10 days per house, which sounds insane if you saw the scope of work that is. But what was cool is we would just get these beautiful 2D illustrations of one wall per room, if that makes sense, to give a general idea of, okay, this is an abandoned warehouse. So there's lots of rust on all the metal fixtures, or the walls are concrete. So they have to have a concrete texture first, and then we paint them to look aged depending on what the era is and the distress. And so that's how Horror Nights worked. It was lots of just free play. It was very creative, and we got to kind of go with the flow, and they had lots of confidence in us. So that was super fun. Whereas doing something for Disney would usually be in a warehouse for the third party vendor that I was working with, where we would have Imagineering come by, which was a dream. That was super cool. But they would come by with the same kind of thing, illustrations, 2D illustrations, measurements, and we'd have the fabricators, the guys who would build the things. It's crazy what you would build, something like a Jungle Cruise wooden sign that's supposed to look like an old just piece of plywood that somebody painted on. That's usually often like laser cut aluminum that is generally the shape of a piece of wood. And then you would have a sculptor put on top of that a 2-part epoxy sculpt to kind of give it the wood grain. And then they would send it over to us. And then we have to automotive primer it with this 2-part epoxy paint. And then we go from there and make it look like just a piece of wood. So it's wild, the process to go through to do something as simple as that. But that's where it would be more warehouse work. They would bring in the large props, including the boats for Jungle Cruise that we'd have there in the warehouse. We actually fiberglass those from scratch from one of their original molds. I don't know how much I can say on this podcast. I don't work for them anymore, but yeah. So it's either warehouse work, working on kind of props or small buildings, or it's field work, which is doing the large construction site projects. Like I worked on Volcano Bay for Universal Studios, all out on site, doing paint out there. And then like Halloween Horror Nights, where it's kind of nicer because you're in an air-conditioned soundstage that's built for that sort of thing. And we come in after the construction's already finished, and we have kind of free reign over texture and paint.
Very cool. Okay, so that's how you learned to not only paint these dioramas that you do now, but create them too. So just to explain what you do to the listeners who maybe have not seen your Instagram, but I will link to the Instagram here. Go check out his stuff because we can describe it so much, but just seeing it, because it's not a canvas painting. It's you create these miniature rooms with doors and things inside of them, these like these mini dioramas, and they look like, if you zoom in really closely with the camera, they look like you're in a real room, but you could zoom out and you're like, oh no, this thing is 10 inches by 10 inches. And it's really cool, and it's Halloween-esque, and it's just really unique. So tell me about from working large scale to now working miniature.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that compliment, because that is the best compliment, hearing that it looks real, that it looks authentically like a large space, because that's the goal. So what I do is a wide variety of things, as simple as a mini like 6-inch figure of a character. I'm kind of recreating based on a lot of Haunted Mansion characters from Disney. I am not calling it Disney's Haunted Mansion figures. They are my own. But I do things like that, as well as, like you said, these larger dioramas that are roughly 12 by 12 by 12 boxes of scenes from theme park attractions. And my background in the scenic industry in Orlando really brought me to where I'm able to do the level of detail that I do now, because I'm able to understand basic construction when it comes to scenes and scenery. I kind of similarly build them now in miniature. That's that same way that you would kind of build in reality. And then the same as textures and paint, I've just had to figure out a realistic, smaller way of doing everything with different types of tools. So using little brushes for texture instead of using large trowels and things like that for large scale. Yeah, I just do a wide variety of things, but it is mostly centered around theme park nostalgia. I've grown up loving the Haunted Mansion specifically, and that was kind of the fuel to the fire of creativity when I was a kid. And so now as an adult, understanding scenic design and production and paint, it's really fun to go back to my original interests and sort of recreate them with the tools that I have. So that's what I do now.
Very cool. I have a couple friends who they really like Halloween time and the scary stuff. And I just so much I'm like, why don't you paint scary stuff? They're like, I don't know. And they kind of paint whatever the customer wants, which so do I. I'm mostly commission based, but it's so cool to see somebody leaning into what you really like to do. How are customers finding you? Are you creating things? I guess this is a two-part question. How are they finding you? And also, what is the commission process like? As in, are you commission based on certain limits, or do you create your own stuff and people buy it? What's it like?
Yeah, that's where the workaholism comes in to play, because I'm constantly battling, do I work on the stack of work that people want me to do versus the new figure I'm really interested in sculpting and painting? And so I do both. But mostly I am commission based. You can message me. It's a little archaic, but I still do all of my orders mostly through Instagram. So if you like something on my page, basically just message me about it and we can figure out how to schedule that. That's how I do pricing as well through there. I do have a general price scale. That's one of my pinned images on Instagram that leads you to my website to talk more about that. But it really just comes down to the hours it takes to sculpt and build and paint. And these larger dioramas definitely reflect that time because they take a large amount of time.
Yeah. And I was going to your Instagram and I went to look at the post that you were describing, and it literally says price estimation guide. And I love that that's so clear because I don't have to go through a lot of different things to find out what post you were talking about. And so putting myself in the mind of a customer going there, I'd be like, because that's one of my first things, like, these are so cool. How do I own one? How much do they cost? And so having that price estimation guide at the top of your, oh, I want to do this. I want to do, everybody's either.
I'm glad you like it.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm looking at it, and for everybody listening, go to the link, go check out what I'm looking at and see if this might be a good idea for you. Cause I'm definitely going to do this. It is, you go there and you have 4 different examples of things in the $200 category, $500, $5,000, $1,000, and how long it's going to take you. Okay. And it just gives examples, like visual examples. Oh, this is great.
Yeah, those things you'll also see on my page. And that was where this came from, was I was getting so many questions about prices and availability, and I can't really be a shop because I rarely have stock. That's why I don't have an Etsy account. Well, I do, but you won't find anything on there. And people often say, why is your shop always empty? And that's because when I do limited releases, because I'm not on a mass production scale by any means, but like my most recent thing that I'm doing is this little figure. It's like a 3-dimensional scene. She's the Witch of Walpurgis. When I release that officially to my subscribers, that's how I started doing it now, is I have a subscription service on my Instagram for those hardcore fans. They pay $5 a month and they get first access. So when I release something and it's going to be a very limited amount, like 15, they will have first access. And then if I have anything left over, I'll post about it and say, hey, I have a few of these left. And then they're usually gone after a couple of days. So I hate to say it and make it sound like so hard to find my things, but I just don't have the bandwidth to create more. But when it comes down to commissions, you can commission me to do one. So if you really love something that I've done, that's how we do the commission process. And you just have to be scheduled in, kind of like a tattoo artist.
Very cool. Okay. So this is just a different way of doing it. And okay, I'm just wrapping my mind around. It's a little convoluted.
I'm trying to streamline it better.
No,
it's
this
just
is
wild
great
right now.
No, yeah,
Okay, cool.
This is great. No, the pricing guide is just so easy, and then also just having those people subscribing to you to get those early releases. Yes, I like it. I haven't heard about it before, so I'm like processing it in my mind. I'm like, this could work maybe. And because I think all of us too, we try to relate it back to our business. Like, could this work for my
Yeah.
business? And do you have conversations with your subscribers very often?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, not as much as I would like to, but yeah, we'll have great discussions. We recently had one about what is the next thing that you want to see. The majority, I would say, of my subscribers are Haunted Mansion fans. So I gave them 2 Haunted Mansion options, and it was hard to say who won, but I'm going to make both anyways. But like that was a great conversation to see what people thought about the concept. And yeah, having the one-on-one interactions about what people want from a thing. It's crazy. Haunted Mansion fans are so specific in what they want because there's so many iterations of things from the Haunted Mansion, because you not only have the 2 in the States, you also have Phantom Manor in Paris and a Tokyo Haunted Mansion, which is very similar to the one here at Disney World. But with those 4 attractions, there have also been iterations through the decades of changes for characters or changes of scenery, or there could be 5 pieces of concept art for one thing in the Haunted Mansion that are 5 different styles. And so that's what I've been having fun with, is looking back on some of the concept art for the ride instead of going directly to the ride, and kind of formulating my own version of a thing and releasing that. And people love that. So instead of trying to appease very specific people, because the Haunted Mansion to everyone is a different thing. That's something that I love about the ride, is that it's so vague in its storytelling, but also so clear and concise, but vague enough that it's interpretive to everyone. So everyone's idea of the Haunted Mansion is something completely different. You can't please everyone. And I think that the movie recently that came out is a perfect example of that. It's going to be very divisive because you have in your head what the Haunted Mansion is to you. And so that's what I love about this particular focus of inspiration.
I can hear the passion in your voice, like just something so specific. You're leaning into what you love.
It's
And so
crazy.
this, I guess what I'm taking from this is, if you have something that's very niche specific like this that you want to do, instead of taking the broad approach of just shouting to social media, you're gathering your collectors by having them take out their credit card. $5 a month isn't much, but it separates them from all your other followers. And to where just that small amount, that even $5 a month, it just puts them in a different club. And then you can really truly see who they are and have conversations with them about what they want, instead of just trying to make it up and wing it. You're taking your collectors and getting their feedback and getting to have those passionate conversations with them about this. And
Yeah.
it's just, I
Yeah,
love
super cool.
this approach. Yeah. It's a more deep dive into it than just, making a reel and hoping for the best. It's,
Right.
you have a better,
which is what I did for a very long time.
Really?
The
Okay.
subscription service is only like a month or 2 old.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Not that I've done Radley Relics for a super long time. This is only I started in 2020 technically, so it's year 3. But yeah, I found that kind of needed to funnel those specific fans or followers into this smaller group is so much easier to have those conversations and stuff. So.
Definitely. Yeah. I can look, and I know certain people who comment on my stuff every time. I know that there's a lot of people who follow me that are never going to become buyers, but this is a good way to separate them and give that extra attention to those buyers. And in order to get a better sale, a happier product, and just a better commission process throughout the whole
thing. And
thing.
to get your attention easier too. I love trying my best to respond to all the comments, and I can't even imagine having 100,000 followers like you. It's nerve-wracking, because you want to appease everyone and you want to make everyone happy, especially when you're running a business through Instagram, but it's just not feasible to be responsive that much of the day. So yeah, it's a much easier way of connecting to those hardcore followers.
Yeah, I would say I'm super guilty of. I have a virtual assistant who replies to majority of things, but
that's awesome.
But yeah, it's awesome, but it's very surface level. Then, I don't have deep conversations or in-depth conversations, I guess, about art with those followers on there, because I'm treating everybody they'll message me a compliment. I'll be like, oh, thanks. I don't know. I'll say something really short and then it ends. But because there's no filtering way. So you're having me think, I'm like, what if there could be a filtering way of people who are interested in if I did more canvas art or murals, and I'm just kidding, the wheels are turning. And so, yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, you're making me realize more about it than I even was thinking about. But yeah, in order, if you're a big fan of an artist, following them is great. But if you want to subscribe to them in this way, then that shows how serious of a fan that you are. And that makes sense to me that that's how the line of communication goes, especially the bigger the artist becomes on Instagram. It's just very difficult to keep up. So
I'm even thinking, I just had this idea. What if we could do something to where, like, say I had 100 people who have bought canvases from me in the past so many years. I could put them into a club somehow, like a group chat or something to where I could go to them when I had a new idea, or even like a 2-tiered club, like the ones who have bought little things from me versus the ones who are big money collectors, and label it as such. Everybody likes to be in, the exclusive top tier club, right? Like I have like the gold status club, or I don't know, like they could just, we could even take, no, they don't even have to be subscribers. It could just be past customers who have spent X amount, or
yes.
whatever it is, and put them that way. They're getting more of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you happen to use a system like Monday.com at all for your work?
What's that?
Well, I'm not very tech savvy, but my good buddy and brother is helping me set up Monday.com account, which is kind of like Sheets, like Google Sheet, right? Google Sheets is a thing where it's it's like a spreadsheet, but can be infinitely more complex, and it's going to help me keep track of all of my customers, the sales, and their information, so that every time I have a repeat customer, it's much easier for me to now find their information instead of having to ask them repeat questions. And it just helps me stay more organized. And we're setting that up now, which I'm really excited about, as opposed to right now, it's all conversation based in Instagram, and then me taking notes on my notes app on iPhone. So it's a mess. And my friend Jeremy can attest to that because he's dealing with it. Thank God. I'm so thankful that he's doing that for me. But yeah, I think that's going to help a ton, at least for me.
That's a great idea.
I don't know how that would work for you. Yeah,
I think it would. If I did more canvas art, I mostly paint murals for businesses. So
larger
they're
murals.
like, they have like events and whatnot. So I don't know that they would like to be in my gold tier club or anything.
Sure.
They would
understand.
Be like,
Yeah.
okay. But for something like you, and if I wanted to do canvas stuff and people who have those preferences, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, that any organization. I have QuickBooks, and that's all the organization
There you go. That's something I need to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's endless, the back end. Okay. Yeah, thank you for giving us a backdrop or background of what you've been doing and how you got into it, and even unknowingly giving tips on how to run a better business with a very specific
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess, what advice, this is what I like to wrap every conversation up with, is what advice do you have for artists who maybe they want to do something very similar to what you want to do? What's your best advice on how they get started as a beginner?
Sure. I think first and foremost, which I spent a lot of my life trying to figure this out myself, is funneling your passions into an art form that you're always going to want to make. That was very challenging for me. For the longest time, I thought I was a 2D portrait painter, or, I had to do 2D painting. And I was more interested in textures, and I was more interested in scenery, until I figured out, dioramas are like the complete package for me. So yeah, I think starting with passion is key for sure. I've heard lots of artists say that, but stick to it. Figure out what your passions are, write them down, see how you can combine them into the perfect sort of formula for art.
Yeah. Okay. And I like that you say write them down, because we're all in our heads. I'm in my head all day thinking of, this and that, but writing it down and funneling it, maybe even saying what I don't want to do, would help narrow that down into something.
For sure.
I like that you're doing it, and it's inspiring me to want to do it. And
absolutely. And I do have one more huge recommendation, because I just remembered, which I wish I shouldn't have remembered so late, but the biggest inspiration to do this business the way that I'm doing it came from a man called Andy J. Pizza. He runs an amazing podcast for people who love podcasts, which I assume most of your listeners do. It's called the Creative Pep Talk Podcast, and it endlessly is so helpful. He's a genius. His only goal is to help other creatives start a business, basically. And he helped me funnel all of my major passions and inspirations and sort of figure out the best way to utilize those for my artwork. So
very cool. Yeah, I've listened to him a couple of years ago, but I got off of it. And so I'm going to tune into the pep talk, the creative pep talk.
Yeah,
podcast.
Sometimes an episode might not speak to you, but if you keep going, they'll be the perfect episode. And you'll like stop in your car and be like, oh my God, I need to soak this in because this is exactly what I was waiting for. So
yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you for the recommendation. I think we can all use more things to listen to, whether it's
Absolutely.
Audible, Disney villain, Audible stories. Or
that's all I do is podcasts and more podcasts. And now YouTube. Music gets so old when you do a job like this where that's all it is listening. So why not learn something while you're working?
So true. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been cool getting to know your back end of your business and you. And I'm excited to keep following you and seeing what you create.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been a great pleasure. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, you too. I'll talk to you later. Thank you. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Artist Academy podcast. I've been putting out at least one episode per week for more than 4 years on this podcast, and it's really cool to see those download numbers go up and up as time goes on. And that's because artists like you listen and share these episodes. So really, when I say thank you, I mean it. It's really cool to see progress along the way. And anyway, if you like this type of art and business content, then I highly encourage you to get the audio version of my book, Mural Money, with over 15 hours of listening inspiration. I'm currently running a special of just $17 for the audio version. You can go to muralmoney.com to find it. And that comes with a bunch of extras like my art supply list, my pricing guide, recommended book and podcast list, and so much more. I filled that book with tips from my art journey of building a profitable mural career. Plus, I've included the best of the best advice from guests I've interviewed on this podcast. It's the most affordable all-in-one book of advice on art and business that I have. And if you enjoy listening to me here, then I know you'll like the book too because I read it myself. All 15 hours of it. The book is available on Amazon and Audible normally for $25, but if you go to muralmoney.com, that is where you can grab the special $17 deal while it lasts. If you haven't listened to my book yet, this is your sign to do it. Again, normally $25. I'm running a special for $17, but you have to go to muralmoney.com. That's where you can grab the audio version of it. And that's all I have for you today. So I will see you next week for another episode of the Artist Academy podcast.